The chamber was heavy with silence, a silence so sharp it felt like glass waiting to shatter. Cameras clicked, pens hovered, and every eye fixed on the long wooden table where history was about to unfold. At one end sat the figure who carried years of arrogance on his shoulders, a man whose very presence seemed to demand submission. His lips curled into a smirk, the kind that announced before he even spoke that disrespect was coming. And then, with a casual cruelty sharpened by entitlement, he leaned forward and unleashed the line that would ricochet across the nation. The words were not just an insult. They were a weapon. A dismissaled background of struggle, of identity itself. He spat them like they cost him nothing, knowing they would cut to the core of anyone who had ever been told they did not belong. For a moment, gasps filled the air like sudden thunder. Reporters froze mid-keystroke. Even his allies shifted. In discomfort, as though realizing they had just witnessed something irreversibly ugly. Across from him, the hero sat motionless. Not because the insult had landed, but because it had revealed everything about the man who delivered it. Eyes steady, posture unshaken, the hero absorbed the venom with the patience of someone who had carried heavier burdens than mere words. While others flinched, they remained calm, almost serene, as if daring the insult to hang in the air and expose its own weakness. The clash of dignity against arrogance electrified the room. It was no longer just politics. It was identity, pride, survival. And though the villain believed he had landed the first blow, the silence that followed whispered another truth. The stage was set, and the real battle had yet to begin. But no one expected what came next. Asterisk, what made the insult so piercing was not just its cruelty, but what it represented. This was not a stray comment in a heated room. It was a reflection of the long shadow that had followed generations of Americans told they were lesser, that their education, their sacrifice, their voices did not count. In that moment, the chamber became more than a room. It became a stage for the nation's unresolved struggle over who gets to belong and who gets to define America itself. For millions watching, this confrontation was not about two individuals. It was about the deeper lines that had always cut across society, between privilege and perseverance, between entitlement and earned respect, between those who had everything handed to them and those who had fought for every inch of progress. The insult cracked open a wound, but it also exposed the raw truth. America was still wrestling with itself. And yet, something shifted. People could feel it, even through a television screen. This was not going to be another moment lost in the daily noise of politics. The weight of silence that followed told everyone they were witnessing something. That would not be forgotten. It was the kind of silence that precedes change, the kind that forces people to sit up straighter and realize history is unfolding in real time. Social media would soon explode. Headlines would stretch the scene into the corners of every conversation. But inside that chamber, the stakes had already risen. The villain thought he had drawn blood with his sneer, but in reality, he had set the stage for his own unraveling. The hero's calm silence was not weakness. It was a warning. This was no longer about policy or procedure. It was about the soul of a nation, about whose story would define tomorrow's America. Every word, every glare, every pause carried the weight of generations past and the hope of those yet to come. The moment was charged, unrepeatable, unforgettable. People would tell their children where they were when they saw it. And then the arrogance reached its breaking point, asterisk, long before the chamber fell silent, long before the cameras lit up. The man at the center of the storm had already written his reputation in ink as dark as the scandals that followed him. He was a figure wrapped in titles, cloaked in prestige, yet carrying a history that revealed a dangerous truth. Power without principle breeds arrogance. He rose not by lifting others, but by stepping on them. Each rung of his career was stained with the quiet sacrifices of people whose names would never be remembered, while his own was etched into headlines that glorified his victories and ignored the rot beneath. He spoke often values, yet lived by none. He paraded his devotion to the Constitution, yet bent it whenever it suited him. He demanded respect, though his record was built on decisions that stripped dignity from those who needed it most. For years, he had built walls around himself, walls of wealth, connections, and privilege that insulated him from accountability. He had been untouchable, or so he believed. But what made him dangerous was not simply his hypocrisy. It was his ability to disguise it. He could smile while undermining, laugh while demeaning, cloak his cruelty in the language of tradition. In public, he carried himself with the air of an elder statesman, but in private, stories leaked of rage, of favoritism, of deals that traded justice for influence. His life was a contradiction, a balance sheet of power gained and trust destroyed. Even now, as he sneered across the chamber, his arrogance was not new. It was the echo of decades spent dismissing those who came from families like the one seated across from him. He had always believed that identity could be weaponized, that belonging could be denied by a sharp word or a well-placed insult. His history was a litany of moments where others swallowed their pain and moved on, too powerless to fight back. And that history had convinced him he could do it again. Yet beneath his confidence was something he could never admit: insecurity. For all his wealth and all his titles, he feared irrelevance. He feared that a new generation would rise and judge him not for the robes he wore or the power he wielded, but for the people he had failed. That fear, buried deep, erupted as cruelty. Each insult was not proof of strength, but of fragility. He lashed out not because he was sure of himself, but because he was terrified the world would finally see through him. The audience watching did not need a biography to sense it. They could feel the cracks forming, see the weight of hypocrisy dragging him down. The arrogance that once protected him was becoming his downfall. But across the aisle, someone was quietly preparing. Before the chamber and the cameras, before the insults and the spectacle, there was a story written not in privilege but in persistence. The hero sitting across from arrogance was not born into power. They had to carve their way through walls that seemed designed to keep them out. Childhood was marked by long days of sacrifice. Parents working jobs that broke their backs yet never bent their spirits. Neighbors who leaned on one another because no one else would. From those early days came the lesson that dignity is not given, it is built. And once built, no one can take it away. Education was not a straight line, but a battle. Doors closed, resources denied. Whispers that said someone like them would never belong in the halls of law, much less in the chambers of government. Yet each rejection became fuel. Late nights of studying by borrowed light, mornings of balancing multiple jobs with coursework, moments of doubt answered by the quiet voice that said, "Keep going." The degree that now hung on their wall was not just paper, it was proof of survival, a declaration that barriers could be broken. But their story was not defined only by personal triumph. It was shaped by service, while others built careers. On self-interest, this hero returned to the very communities people like the antagonist dismissed. They fought for those whose names would never make headlines, for immigrants navigating systems stacked against them, for workers who gave everything yet were left with nothing. They stood not for applause but for justice, believing deeply that the measure of a life is not the titles you collect, but the lives you lift. That is what made their presence so powerful in this moment. Every calm breath, every steady glance was backed by a history of resilience. They had known what it felt like to be underestimated, dismissed, erased. They had lived it. And because they had lived it, they carried a strength the villain could never understand. It was not the strength of money or connections. It was the strength of having walked through fire and still believing in hope. This was why the insult could not break them. It was not the first, and it would not be the last. Words meant to wound had always been turned into armor, into fuel, into something sharper than any attack. And those watching could sense it. The crowd leaning in, the viewers glued to their screens, all could see that this was not just a politician enduring an insult. This was a human being standing for every person who had ever been told they did not belong. And when the spotlight turned, that strength would erupt. The air thickened as the exchange moved from insult to confrontation. The villain, sensing an audience, leaned into his arrogance. His voice rose above the chamber like a gavel striking without mercy, each word sharpened to demean and provoke. He spoke over the hero, interrupting with smirks, laughing as though the entire proceeding was his stage and everyone else merely an audience to his performance. Each interruption sent murmurs rippling through the crowd, reporters' fingers racing to capture the venom in real time. Yet the more he doubled down, the more the contrast revealed itself. His face grew flushed, his hands restless, his tone increasingly desperate. He thought volume equaled power, that repetition meant dominance. But beneath the bluster, there was the unmistakable stench of insecurity. What he intended as authority sounded instead like fear clawing for validation. Across from him, the hero never raised their voice. They let the storm rage, eyes steady, posture unwavering. Every sneer was met with silence that spoke louder than any rebuttal. That composure unnerved the villain more than any counter-argument could. It was as though the hero understood that true strength is not measured by who can shout the loudest, but by who can stand unshaken when shouted at. The chamber grew restless. Some leaned forward, eager to witness the clash. Others recoiled at the ugliness on display. But all could feel the temperature rising, as though something irreversible was about to happen. The villain continued, pressing harder, hurling words. That no longer sounded like reason, but like desperation dressed as confidence. He mistook noise for victory, blind to how his performance was unraveling before the eyes of the nation. And still the hero waited. Every interruption was a rope the villain was wrapping tighter around himself. Every outburst dug the pit deeper. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, not in agreement, but in disbelief at how far arrogance would go when left unchecked. The villain could not see it. But the audience could. His fury was no longer landing blows, it was setting him up for the fall. The tension reached its breaking point. The hero lifted their gaze, a calm signal that the waiting was over. The chamber quieted instinctively, as if the air itself knew something was about to change. The villain, still caught in his rant, failed to notice the shift. Until one line silenced the entire chamber. Asterisk. The room froze when the hero finally spoke. Their voice did not rise to meet the villain's rage. It sank beneath it, steady and clear, like stone dropped into turbulent water. You confuse privilege. For principle, they began, each word deliberate, slicing through the air with a calm authority that silenced even the shuffling of papers. For the first time that day, the villain's laughter faltered. The hero leaned forward, their eyes locked, not with anger, but with certainty. You believe that shouting makes you right. You believe that mocking someone's background erases their work. But history has never remembered the loudest voice. It has remembered the voice that speaks truth when truth is under attack. The chamber erupted with murmurs, a current of recognition passing through the room. The hero paused, letting the weight of the moment build before striking again. You question my legitimacy? Let us speak of legitimacy. While you were securing favors behind closed doors, I was standing with families who could not afford lawyers. While you wrapped yourself in robes of power, I was fighting for those this system forgot. And while you insult my education, know this. Every degree, every step I took, I earned without a single hand to lift me but my own. Gasp cut across the audience. The villain shifted, his smirk fading into a twitch of unease. The hero did not relent. You wear arrogance like a shield, but it cannot hide the truth. You're afraid that your time is slipping, that this country is changing, that people like me, people you said would never belong, are standing here, not just surviving, but leading. The words landed like thunder. A pause followed, stretched long and deliberate, as though the hero wanted the nation to breathe in the truth before the final blow. Then, with a voice calm but devastating, they delivered it. Your insult says nothing about me. It says everything about you. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, the kind that swallows a room whole. Then it broke. Applause burst like a wave crashing against rock, shouts rising from the back. Reporters scrambling to capture what had just happened. The chamber shook with energy, The kind that only comes when a single moment slices history into before and after. The villain tried to recover, fumbling with words that suddenly sounded small, rehearsed, brittle. His face reddened, his voice cracked as he attempted to reclaim the ground that had just collapsed beneath him. But the power had shifted. The crowd was no longer listening to him. They were leaning toward the hero, feeding off the composure, the strength, the unapologetic dignity. Beyond the chamber, the eruption spread like wildfire. Phones buzzed, clips uploaded in seconds. Hashtags lit up across platforms. Hashtag truth over arrogance. Hashtag dignity wins. Hashtag mic drop moment. Memes, reaction videos, praise from public figures each second multiplied the reach of what had just unfolded. Millions watched. Millions shared. Millions felt the validation of seeing arrogance humbled by resilience. Inside, the hero sat back, their expression unshaken. They had not raised their voice, yet they had dismantled a giant. They had not matched insult for insult, yet they had left the villain exposed, trembling beneath the weight of his own weakness. It was not just a victory for one person. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been told they did not belong. The villain's smirk was gone. The arrogance that once filled the chamber had drained, replaced by something he could not disguise: fear. And as the crowd still buzzed, as the cameras flashed, as history branded this the moment dignity conquered disdain, the stage shifted yet again. But the ripple effect had only just begun. The chamber emptied, but the moment did not stay trapped within those walls. Within minutes, clips of the exchange flooded social media feeds across the nation. Hashtags exploded in trending lists, carried not only by supporters but by stunned onlookers who had never seen the villain so thoroughly undone. Memes surfaced in real time, clever captions paired with screenshots of the hero's calm, piercing stare, while the villain's stammering face became a punchline repeated thousands of times over. By nightfall, late-night hosts had already woven the takedown into their monologues. Each line met with roars of laughter from studio audiences who reveled in the shared cultural moment. But it was not only comedy. Pundits on every network replayed the scene, frame by frame, analyzing tone, body language, and the significance of a line that had struck with the force of a hammer. Analysts on progressive platforms hailed it as more than a debate victory. It was a reclaiming of dignity for communities too often spoken over. Meanwhile, the villain's allies scrambled to mount defenses, issuing statements filled with empty spin. But their words felt brittle, unconvincing. Commentators pointed out the desperation, the frantic attempts to rewrite a moment that had already been etched in the public's memory. In immigrant households, in classrooms, in community centers, the clip played again and again. Parents nudged their children, saying, "Do you see that? This is what standing your ground looks like." Teachers used it as a spark for discussions about truth, courage, and the value of refusing to be silenced. The resonance stretched beyond politics. It was personal, it was cultural, it was pride stitched into the fabric of identity. The internet did not quiet down. Instead, it grew louder, surging with energy that could not be contained by traditional media. The moment had leapt from a single chamber into the bloodstream of the nation, shaping conversations at dinner tables and offices and rideshares and grocery store lines. For some, it was validation. For others, it was a warning shot that the old rules were no longer uncheckable. And yet, at the heart of it all was something deeper,